In the pantheon of progressive rock, few acts remain as enigmatic and fascinating as the Alan Parsons Project. Unlike traditional rock bands that toured relentlessly and cultivated stage personas, this British studio project chose a different path entirely. For 15 years, from 1975 to 1990, Alan Parsons and Eric Woolfson created a series of meticulously crafted concept albums that pushed the boundaries of studio production while exploring themes ranging from Edgar Allan Poe's macabre tales to the implications of artificial intelligence. The Alan Parsons Project wasn't a band in the conventional sense. It was a rotating collective of session musicians, guest vocalists, and visionary creators who operated behind the scenes. This approach was revolutionary for its time and would influence countless artists in the decades to come. Their music blended progressive rock's complexity with accessible pop sensibilities, creating a sound that was simultaneously sophisticated and commercially viable. This is the story of how an audio engineer who worked on the Beatles' Abbey Road and Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon joined forces with a Scottish songwriter to create some of the most innovative music of the 1970s in 1980 seconds. It's a tale of artistic triumph, commercial success, creative differences, and ultimately, an inevitable parting of ways. But most importantly, it's the story of music that continues to resonate with audiences decades after its creation. Born on December 20, 1948, in London, England, Alan Parsons didn't initially set out to become one of rock music's most respected producers and engineers. As a teenager in the late 1960s, he was just another aspiring guitarist trying to emulate Eric Clapton during the British blues boom. However, fate had different plans for young Parsons. In 1967, at the tender age of 18, Parsons talked his way into a position at Abbey Road Studios, starting in the tape duplication department. This humble beginning would prove to be the foundation of an illustrious career. Within a short time, he climbed the ranks from assistant engineer to engineer, and eventually to producer. His timing couldn't have been better. The late 1960s and early 1970s were a golden age for British rock music, and Abbey Road was at the epicenter of it all. Working under the legendary producer George Martin, Parsons gained invaluable experience. As a tape operator during the Beatles' Get Back sessions, he earned his first engineering credit on the iconic Abbey Road album in 1969, followed by Let It Be in 1970. These weren't just any albums, they were cultural touchstones that would define a generation. For a young engineer, it was an education that money couldn't buy. But it was Parsons' work with Pink Floyd that truly established his reputation as a sonic innovator. As the engineer on the Dark Side of the Moon in 1973, he helped create one of the most sonically sophisticated albums in rock history. The album's lush arrangements, innovative use of studio technology, and pristine sound quality became a benchmark for audio engineering. Parsons had proven he could turn artistic vision into auditory reality. Following his success with Pink Floyd, Parsons became a sought-after producer, working with acts like Pilot, Steve Harley, Cockney Rebel, John Miles, L. Stewart, Ambrosia, and the Hollies. Each project added to his growing expertise in crafting sophisticated, radio-friendly rock music. However, Parsons grew increasingly frustrated with artists who, in his view, made stupid requests that compromised his productions. He began to dream of a project where he would have complete creative control over the final product. While Alan Parsons was making his name in London's recording studios, Eric Norman Woolfson was charting his own course through the music industry. Born on March 18, 1945, in the Charing Cross area of Glasgow, Scotland, Woolfson came from a Jewish family that owned the Elders Furniture Store. Raised in the Pollokshields area of the city, he was educated at the prestigious High School of Glasgow. Woolfson's musical journey began with inspiration from an uncle, and he taught himself to play the piano. After briefly considering a career in accounting, the young Scotsman made the bold decision to move to London in 1963 to pursue opportunities in the music industry. It was a gamble that would eventually pay off handsomely. In London, Woolfson found work as a session pianist, gradually building a reputation as a talented performer and songwriter. The Rolling Stones producer Andrew Loog Oldham recognized his potential and signed him as a songwriter. Throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s, Woolfson worked as an independent record producer for several companies, collaborating with artists including Dave Barry, The Equals, and The Tremolos. Despite these successes, Woolfson found that earning a steady living solely as a songwriter was challenging. He decided to pivot into artist management, and his instincts proved impeccable. His first major signing was Carl Douglas, whose record, Kung Fu Fighting in 1974, became one of the biggest-selling singles of all time. This success gave Woolfson the credibility and financial stability to pursue more ambitious projects. During this period, Woolfson had been developing a concept for an album based on the works of Edgar Allan Poe, the American master of Gothic horror and mystery. He had written some material for this project, but needed the right collaborator to bring his vision to life, someone who could translate his creative ideas into stunning sonic reality. In the summer of 1974, destiny intervened in the canteen of Abbey Road Studios. Alan Parsons and Eric Woolfson met for the first time, and both immediately recognized the potential for collaboration. Parsons was already an established producer and engineer with an impressive resume, while Woolfson was working as a songwriter and producer, managing his growing roster of artists. Woolfson, always the astute businessman, saw an opportunity. He asked to become Parsons' manager, and Parsons agreed. It was the start of what would become one of the most successful partnerships in progressive rock history. Initially, Woolfson managed Parsons' career as he continued producing albums for other artists. Together, they worked with bands like Pilot, Cockney Rebel, John Miles, Al Stewart, Ambrosia, and the Hollies, each project strengthening their working relationship and mutual understanding. As they worked together, Woolfson came up with an innovative concept that would change everything. He noted how the film industry had shifted its marketing focus from movie stars to directors like Alfred Hitchcock and Stanley Kubrick. Why not apply the same principle to music? Rather than building a traditional band with fixed members, they could create a project centered around Parsons' production skills and Woolfson's songwriting, using the best session musicians for each album. Woolfson recalled his earlier Edgar Allan Poe concept and saw how perfectly it could combine his and Parsons' talents. Parsons would produce and engineer songs written and composed by the two of them, creating a seamless fusion of technical expertise and creative vision. In 1975, the Alan Parsons Project was officially created, and they signed a record deal with 20th Century Fox Records. After nearly 2 years of meticulous work, the Alan Parsons Project unveiled their debut album, Tales of Mystery and Imagination. In 1976, based on Edgar Allan Poe's literary works, the album was a bold statement of intent. It featured major contributions from members of Pilot and Ambrosia, two bands Parsons and Woolfson had previously worked with, establishing the rotating cast of musicians that would become the project's trademark. The album was an immediate critical and commercial success, reaching the top 40 in the US Billboard 200 chart. Songs like The Raven, featuring lead vocals by actor Leonard Whiting, and the epic 15-minute piece The Fall of the House of Usher showcased the project's ability to blend symphonic grandeur with rock music's energy. The album's production was revolutionary, incorporating innovative techniques that would become Parsons' signature. According to the 2007 remastered liner notes, The Raven was the first rock song to use a vocoder for vocals, with Parsons speaking lyrics through it. The success of Tales of Mystery and Imagination caught the attention of Clive Davis at Arista Records, who quickly signed the Alan Parsons Project for future albums. This partnership with Arista would prove crucial to the project's continued success throughout the late 1970s and 1980 seconds. For their second album, Parsons and Woolfson chose to explore themes inspired by Isaac Asimov's science fiction novels about robots and artificial intelligence. I, Robot, released in July 1977, represented a thematic shift from Gothic horror to futuristic speculation about humanity's relationship with technology, a theme that feels even more relevant today. The album's sound was dominated by synthesizers and keyboards, creating a futuristic atmosphere that perfectly complemented its subject matter. While it maintained progressive rock's complexity, I, Robot was more accessible than its predecessor, featuring several songs that received significant radio airplay. I Wouldn't Want to Be Like You became a hit single, reaching notable positions on the Billboard Hot 100. I, Robot established several hallmarks of the Alan Parsons Project sound: lush keyboard arrangements, pristine production, multiple vocalists chosen specifically for each song, and instrumental passages that showcased Parsons' engineering prowess. The album's blend of art rock and accessible pop rock demonstrated that progressive music didn't have to be inaccessible to mainstream audiences. The project's momentum continued with Pyramid in 1978, which explored themes of ancient Egypt and the occult. The album featured the track What Goes Up, with vocals by David Patton, who would become one of the project's most consistent contributors. Pyramid earned the project another Grammy nomination for Best Engineered Album, non-classical, cementing Parsons' reputation as a master of studio craft. Eve, released in 1979, took a different thematic approach, exploring the feminine mystique and relationships between men and women. While perhaps less exciting than their earlier concept albums, it represented the project's evolution toward a more pop-oriented sound. The album received yet another Grammy nomination for Best Engineered Album, and tracks like Damned If I Do received significant airplay. Throughout this period, the project's popularity continued to grow, particularly in North America, continental Europe, and Ibero-America. Interestingly, they never achieved the same level of success in Parsons' native UK, never reaching the top 40 singles chart or top 20 album chart there. This geographic disparity in success would remain a constant throughout their career. In 1980, the Alan Parsons Project released what many consider their finest achievement, The Turn of a Friendly Card. The album's concept explored the dangers of gambling, both literal and metaphorical, serving as a commentary on risk-taking in modern society. The album featured some of the project's most beloved songs, including the hit single Games People Play and the beautiful ballad Time, which marked one of the first occasions where Eric Woolfson took lead vocals on a project recording. The album's centerpiece was a 16-minute suite that showcased the project's progressive rock credentials while maintaining commercial appeal. Critics praised the album's cohesive concept and musical variety, noting how it successfully balanced artistic ambition with accessibility. The Turn of a Friendly Card earned another Grammy nomination and became one of the project's best-selling albums. The album's success was particularly significant because it demonstrated that concept albums dealing with serious themes could still find a mainstream audience in the early 1980s, an era when punk rock and new wave were supposedly making such sophisticated rock music obsolete. The Alan Parsons Project reached the zenith of their commercial success with 198 to Ease Eye in the Sky. The album's title track, featuring Woolfson's distinctive vocals, became the project's biggest hit, reaching the top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 and receiving constant radio airplay. The song's memorable chorus and atmospheric production made it an instant classic, but Eye in the Sky was more than just its title track. The album opened with Sirius, an instrumental piece that would become perhaps the project's most recognizable composition. The Chicago Bulls adopted Sirius as their entrance music during their dominant 1,990 seconds run, introducing the project's music to a whole new generation of fans. The track has since been used in countless sports venues, television shows, and films, including Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. The album received a Grammy nomination for Best Engineered Recording, and a compilation album, The Best of the Alan Parsons Project, was released in 1983 to capitalize on their mainstream success. At this point, the project seemed unstoppable, having achieved the perfect balance between artistic integrity and commercial appeal. Interestingly, according to Eric Woolfson, Alan Parsons' initial reaction to Eye in the Sky was less than enthusiastic. Woolfson had to argue hard for its inclusion on the album. This tension between the two creators' visions would become more pronounced in the years to come. Ammonia Avenue, released in 1984, drew its inspiration from an unlikely source. Eric Woolfson met John Harvey Jones, the chairman of ICI Imperial Chemical Industries, who invited him to visit an ICI plant. This visit sparked the album's concept, which explored themes of industry, chemistry, and human society's complex relationship with technology and manufacturing. The album marked another milestone. It was during this year that the Alan Parsons Project albums were released on CD for the first time, helping to introduce their meticulously crafted sound to the emerging digital audio format. The album maintained the project's high production standards and featured strong songwriting, but some critics noticed a slight decline in the innovative spark that had characterized their earlier work. By 1985, the music industry landscape was changing rapidly. MTV had transformed how music was marketed and consumed, and synthesizer-based pop was dominating the charts. Vulture Culture, released that year, showed the project attempting to adapt to these changes, but not always successfully. The album featured Don't Answer Me, which became the project's last major hit in the United States, reaching the top 15 on the American charts. The song's animated music video, created with a unique mix of stop-motion, hand-drawn, and clay animation set in a fictional 1,930 seconds comic book world, was nominated in the first annual MTV Video Music Awards. However, despite this success, the album overall lacked the cohesion and innovative edge of earlier releases. Critics and fans began to notice that the project's albums were becoming more formulaic. The symphonic elements that had characterized earlier works were being replaced by synthesizers, reflecting the mid-1980s trend, but at the cost of some of the project's unique character. The creative spark seemed to be dimming. Stereotomy, released in 1986, represented the project's full embrace of synth-pop production, almost entirely synthesizer-based. The album showed the influence of the decade's predominant musical trends. While it was more diverse than its predecessor Vulture Culture, the overall quality had noticeably declined. The album earned a Grammy nomination for Best Album Package and another for Best Instrumental Performance for Where's the Walrus. These nominations recognized the project's continued technical excellence, but the music itself was receiving less enthusiastic reviews. Songs felt longer without adding substance, and the concept that had always been so crucial to the project's work seemed diluted. By this point, even devoted fans were admitting that Woolfson's songwriting had run out of steam. The album still contained some quality tracks, but the consistency and innovation that had defined the project's golden years were missing. After Stereotomy, there were fewer hit singles and declining album sales. The Alan Parsons Project's official final album, Gaudí, was released in 1987. Named after the Spanish architect Antoni Gaudí, the album explored themes of art, architecture, and creativity. It featured the track La Sagrada Familia, named after Gaudí's famous unfinished basilica in Barcelona. Remarkably, Spanish football fans began singing La Sagrada Barcelona in the style of the track on stadium terraces, giving the project an unexpected cultural legacy. Despite some interesting moments, Gaudí confirmed that the project's creative decline was real and perhaps irreversible. The album lacked the ambition and execution of their earlier concept albums. Reviews were mixed at best, and sales continued to disappoint. It had become clear that the magic formula that had made the project so successful was no longer working. Tales of Mystery and Imagination was remastered and released on CD for the first time during this period, perhaps suggesting that both the project and its record label recognized that looking backward was more profitable than moving forward. The glory days were behind them. Before discussing the project's ultimate demise, it's worth mentioning a little-known chapter in their history. In 1979, at the height of their creative powers, Parsons and Woolfson recorded an instrumental album called The Sicilian Defense, named after a famous chess opening. However, this album wasn't intended as a proper Alan Parsons Project release. According to Parsons, The Sicilian Defense was essentially a contractual obligation album created hastily to fulfill their deal with their record label while they negotiated new terms. It was made very quickly in just 3 days compared to the 3 or 4 months they typically spent on a proper album. The album contained no vocals, only instrumental pieces, with every song title referencing chess moves. Parsons and Woolfson delivered both Eve and The Sicilian Defense simultaneously to the label, essentially saying, "There are your last 2 albums. Now, give us a new deal." The album was shelved and remained unreleased for 36 years. Parsons admitted he didn't even possess a copy of it from 1979 until it was finally released in 2014 as part of the Complete Albums Collection box set. He described it as interesting, but not the greatest piece of work and not up to the standard of the real project albums. After Gaudí, Parsons and Woolfson began working on what was intended to be the project's 11th studio album. Eric Woolfson had become fascinated with the life and work of Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis. He retraced Freud's footsteps, visiting his homes in London and Vienna, both now museums, and immersed himself in Freud's writings on the unconscious, the Oedipus complex, the ego and id, and the interpretation of dreams. As the album took shape, it featured the project's usual lineup of session musicians and guest vocalists, including Leo Sayer, Kiki D, Marty Webb, Eric Stewart of 10ccs, and previous project contributors like Chris Rainbow, John Miles, and Graham Dye. Alan Parsons made musical contributions throughout and handled engineering and production duties. As always, everything seemed to be progressing normally for another Alan Parsons Project release. However, about halfway through the recording process, everything changed. Theatrical producer Brian Brawley approached Woolfson with a proposal to develop Fruitiana into a stage musical. Woolfson was immediately intrigued. He had always been interested in musical theater and saw Andrew Lloyd Webber's success as proof that this medium could be fulfilling for a writer like himself. This created a fundamental conflict. Woolfson wanted to expand the project and adapt it for the stage, literally doubling the length of the work to accommodate a full theatrical production. Parsons, however, had no interest in theatrical work and wanted to continue making studio albums as they always had. The creative differences that had simmered beneath the surface throughout their partnership suddenly came to a boil. As Parsons later recalled in an interview, "We often disagreed, and the tragic thing about Fruitiana was that it all turned into a legal battle between Eric and the producer. A sad time for all of us because we were in and out of court for more than 3 years, paying a lot of money. It's bad because the show really had the potential of Cats or Les Miserables and then went down in completely nonsensical litigation." In 1990, Fruitiana was released not as an Alan Parsons Project album, but as a collaboration between Eric Woolfson and Alan Parsons. The decision was made that this would not carry the project name, marking the effective end of the Alan Parsons Project. Despite featuring the project's personnel and Parsons' production, it became known as the unofficial project album. 2 versions of the album were released, the white album the studio version, and the black album the German original. Cast recording. The musical premiered at the theater in Der Wien in Vienna, Austria, on December 19, 1990, running for 380 performances before 320,000 people through April 18, 1992. It was a substantial success, but it came at a price. The legal battles over Fruitiana destroyed what remained of Parsons and Woolfson's working relationship. When asked about his relationship with Woolfson after the musical, Parsons stated, "Unfortunately, that was also our last project together. After all the disputes, he really wanted to go back to the theater, and I personally didn't really see the point of expressing my creativity there." The Alan Parsons Project had performed live only once during its original incarnation in 1990, the same year of the split. These concerts featured all project regulars except Woolfson, who remained behind the scenes while Parsons stayed at the mixer except for the last song, when he played acoustic guitar. It was a bittersweet moment, the project finally performing on stage just as it was coming to an end. The dissolution of the Alan Parsons Project can be attributed to several interconnected factors. First and foremost were the fundamental creative differences between Parsons and Woolfson. Parsons was a studio perfectionist who wanted to continue refining their sound within the album format. Woolfson, on the other hand, had grown interested in the possibilities of musical theater and wanted to expand into new creative territories. Second, there was the natural creative exhaustion that comes from 15 years of collaboration. As many critics noted, Woolfson's songwriting had run out of steam by the mid-1980s. The diminishing returns in their later albums suggested that they had perhaps explored all the creative avenues available within their established formula. Third, the changing music industry landscape worked against them. The Alan Parsons Project's sophisticated, album-oriented approach was increasingly at odds with the MTV era's emphasis on visual presentation and single-driven success. While they had adapted somewhat with videos like Don't Answer Me, they never fully embraced the new paradigm. Finally, there was the matter of recognition and credit. In an interview, Woolfson explained why the project bore Parsons' name rather than being called the Woolfson or Parsons Project or Eric Woolfson Project. "I described the decision to call it the Alan Parsons Project as both the best and the worst decision of my career. The best, because I have enjoyed the benefits of the APP success without having to deal with public recognition and media attention. The worst because outside my family and friends, few people have any idea of who I am or what I do." By 1990, this arrangement may have become increasingly frustrating for Woolfson, who wrote most of the lyrics and much of the music but remained in Parsons' shadow. After the split, Alan Parsons made it clear that he no longer felt comfortable using the project name. The Alan Parsons Project had been the name of the Parsons or Woolfson partnership, and without Woolfson, it wouldn't be the same. He chose to continue making music under his own name. Parsons released his first solo album, Try Anything Once, in 1993. While it featured the pristine production quality fans expected, it lacked Woolfson's songwriting contributions and relied on material from other writers. Subsequent solo albums followed: On Air 1996, The Time Machine 1999, A Valid Path 2004, The Secret 2019, and From the New World 2022. More significantly, Parsons began touring extensively as the Alan Parsons Live Project with Woolfson's permission to use a variant of the project name. Since 1999, he has performed live regularly, featuring a rotating lineup of talented musicians including lead singer P.J. Olson, guitarist Jeffrey Coleman, and other skilled performers. The live shows primarily feature Alan Parsons Project songs, introducing their music to new generations and giving longtime fans the concert experience they never had during the project's heyday. In 2013, the Alan Parsons Live Project performed in Medellin, Colombia, with a full choir and orchestra as the Alan Parsons Symphonic Project. This performance was recorded and released on CD and DVD in 2016, showcasing how the project's music could be reimagined with full orchestral arrangements. Parsons has received numerous accolades for his work. He was nominated for 13 Grammy Awards throughout his career, finally winning in 2019 for Best Immersive Audio Album for the 35th anniversary edition of Eye in the Sky. This recognition validated his pioneering work in audio engineering and production. Eric Woolfson pursued the path that had caused the split with Parsons, fully committing himself to musical theater. As he explained in a 2004 interview, "I eventually developed the Alan Parsons Project as a vehicle, but then I realized that there was more to it than that, and that Andrew Lloyd Webber was right, and that the stage musical was a fulfilling media for a writer like myself." After Fruitiana, Woolfson created several more musicals. Gaudi 1993 continued the theme of the final project album, exploring the life and work of Antoni Gaudí. Gambler 1996 tackled the psychology of gambling addiction. In 2003, he came full circle with Edgar Allan Poe, a musical based on the life of the author whose works had inspired the very first Alan Parsons Project album. The production premiered at Abbey Road Studios and was released as Poe More Tales of Mystery and Imagination, completing a creative journey that had begun nearly 30 years earlier. In 2008, Woolfson released the Alan Parsons Project That Never Was, an album featuring songs that had been pitched for the project but never completed. As he explained in the liner notes, he and Parsons didn't always agree on what made a good project recording. Some songs, including what would become major hits like Eye in the Sky and Don't Answer Me, had required Woolfson to argue hard for their inclusion. Other songs had fallen by the wayside, and this album gave them new life. Tragically, Eric Woolfson died from kidney cancer in London on December 2, 2009, at the age of 64. He was survived by his wife Hazel, daughters Sally Seddon and Lorna Covington, and 4 grandchildren. He was buried in Cathcart Cemetery near Glasgow. Returning to the city where his musical journey had begun, Woolfson's death marked the final end of any possibility of a reunion. The creative tension that had driven the project forward and ultimately torn it apart was gone forever. Despite never achieving massive success in their native UK, the Alan Parsons Project left an indelible mark on popular music. Their approach to music making, treating the studio as an instrument, using rotating cast of musicians, creating carefully crafted concept albums influenced countless artists who followed. The project's influence can be heard in the work of various artists who embraced studio experimentation and conceptual thinking. Their blend of progressive rock complexity with pop accessibility helped pave the way for artists who refused to choose between artistic ambition and commercial success. Sirius became one of the most recognized pieces of instrumental music in sports, played in arenas and stadiums worldwide. The Chicago Bulls' adoption of the song during their 1990s dynasty introduced Alan Parsons Project music to millions who had never bought one of their albums. Today, the track continues to be used in various contexts, from television shows to films, keeping the project's music alive in popular culture. The project's albums, particularly I, Robot, The Turn of a Friendly Card, and Eye in the Sky, continue to be regarded as classics of progressive rock and art rock. Their pristine production quality makes them popular choices for audiophiles testing their sound systems. In 2026, marking the 50th anniversary of their debut album, there are plans for an official book and documentary about the project, ensuring their story will be told to new generations. The story of the Alan Parsons Project is, in many ways, a perfect encapsulation of the promises and pitfalls of artistic collaboration. Two talented individuals came together with complementary skills, one a masterful producer and engineer who could turn sonic visions into reality, the other a gifted songwriter and conceptualist who could craft compelling narratives and melodies. Together, they created something neither could have achieved alone. For 15 years, this partnership produced some of the most sophisticated and accessible progressive rock ever made. They proved that concept albums didn't have to be pretentious or inaccessible, that studio bands could achieve commercial success without touring, and that meticulous production could enhance rather than overwhelm good songwriting. Their rise was meteoric, propelled by groundbreaking albums that explored fascinating themes through innovative sounds. From Edgar Allan Poe's Dark Tales to the implications of artificial intelligence, from the dangers of gambling to the mysteries of ancient Egypt, the project took listeners on conceptual journeys that engaged both the mind and the emotions. But, like many great partnerships in rock music, the same creative differences that initially drove them forward eventually pulled them apart. Parsons' perfectionism and preference for studio work clashed with Woolfson's desire to explore musical theater. Their songwriting formula, so fresh and exciting in the late 1970s, had become stale by the late 1980s. The changing music industry landscape didn't help, as their album-oriented approach struggled in the MTV era. The fall, when it came, was perhaps inevitable. Fruitiana, the album that should have been their 11th triumph, instead became the catalyst for their dissolution. Legal battles replaced creative collaboration, and by 1990, the Alan Parsons Project was finished. Both men went on to pursue separate paths that reflected their individual passions, Parsons continuing to refine his sonic craft and perform live, Woolfson fully embracing the theatrical work he had always been drawn to. Looking back from the perspective of 2026, we can appreciate the Alan Parsons Project for what they achieved rather than lamenting what they might have done. They created a body of work that stands the test of time, albums that continue to sound fresh and relevant decades after their release. They influenced countless artists and left behind songs that have become part of popular culture's fabric. Perhaps most importantly, the Alan Parsons Project showed that there was more than one way to be a rock band. You didn't need to tour endlessly or cultivate a visual image. You didn't need to compromise your artistic vision for commercial success or make pretentious music to be considered serious artists. You just needed exceptional talent, complementary skills, and the vision to do something different. In the end, the Alan Parsons Project's legacy is secure. They were a unique phenomenon in rock history, a studio-based concept that created consistently excellent music for 15 years, bridging the gap between progressive rock's ambition and pop music's accessibility. Their rise showcased what could be achieved when two talented individuals combined their gifts. Their fall demonstrated that even the most successful partnerships can't last forever when creative visions diverge. But the music remains, and in the final analysis, that's what matters most. From the Raven to Sirius, from Eye in the Sky to Time, the Alan Parsons Project created a body of work that continues to inspire, entertain, and amaze. That is their true legacy, and it's one that will endure long after the story of their rise and fall has faded into history.